is one of the most remarkable criticisms in the history of English literature. This preface was published in 1800, just after the publication of the Lyrical Ballads, which was jointly published by William Wordsworth and his close friend S.T. Coleridge. But after the publication of the Lyrical Ballads, William Wordsworth had decided to include a preface to talk about different things regarding poetry in this preface. And this preface was included with the Lyrical Ballads just after 2 years. Preface means actually the introduction to a book. This type of preface is included in a particular book to talk about the subject matter or the aims of that book. Preface is also an introduction to the Lyrical Ballads. William Wordsworth had talked about different aspects of poetry in this preface to the Lyrical Ballads. William Wordsworth had given the definition of poetry in this preface. And according to William Wordsworth, the definition of poetry is given in this way, that poetry is the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings recollected in tranquility. And this is the belief of William Wordsworth, that poetry is the outburst of the powerful feelings. And William Wordsworth has also talked about the subject matter of poetry in this preface. William Wordsworth expressed that he would like to take the subject matter from the common and real life of human beings, the ordinary human beings. He was not interested to select the upper class society like the neoclassical poets. Rather, he would like to liberate the poetry from the upper class to the ordinary classes of people. And to make poetry popular to the ordinary people, William Wordsworth had also selected common ordinary language that is normally used in the ordinary life. And Wordsworth believed that a poet should not write for the poets. A poet should not write for the philosophical person. A poet should not write only for the learned persons. Rather, a poet should write for all classes of people. Particularly, the ordinary people should get inspiration from poetry, and it was actually the belief of William Wordsworth. William Wordsworth had also talked about the function of poetry. He expressed his opinion that poetry should teach and delight. So, the primary functions of poetry are two. There are two primary functions of poetry. One is to give delight, to provide delight, to impart delight. And the second function of poetry is to teach. A better poetry is that poetry which has both these functions, and which can carry out both these functions, to give delight and to impart teaching. But the most important function of poetry is to give delight, because if poetry can teach without giving delight, that cannot be a better type of poetry according to William Wordsworth. William Wordsworth has also talked about the characteristics of the poet in this preface. He focuses on this characteristic that if anyone would like to be a poet, he should have to possess this type of characteristics. Number one, a poet should be a man speaking to men. A poet should be a man speaking to men. This is the first and foremost quality or characteristic of a poet. Second thing is that a poet should possess a comprehensive soul. The third one is that a poet should have the power of sensibility. And the next thing is that a poet should have the power of imagination. And then the poet should look before and after. Poet should look to the past and will also look to the future. And a poet should have the power of visualization. These are the characteristics that a poet should have according to William Wordsworth. William Wordsworth also focuses on the language or the diction of poetry, that is the poetic diction. He was unlike the neoclassical poets. Neoclassical poets practiced the high bombastic language in their poetry, the language which was far, understanding of the common people, which was beyond the understanding level of the common people. But Wordsworth liberated the language from that upper class to the ordinary class, and therefore he selected the very language of common society. There is the selection according to Wordsworth, but the base of the language of poetry should have to be taken from common society, ordinary society, the very language used by common people. And William Wordsworth was not habituated to select the inane phraseology or the difficult words in poetry. Rather, he would like to select that type of language which may be intelligible to the common people. William Wordsworth also talks about the difference between poetry and prose. William Wordsworth doesn't believe that there is actually any difference between prose and poetry, particularly in the selection of language. But one difference is that in poetry there is meter, but in prose there is no meter. But all the words used either in poetry or in prose can be similar to each other according to William Wordsworth. And William Wordsworth has given this quotation that poetry sheds no tears, just as angels weep, just as the natural tears. And in this way, Wordsworth focuses that as there is the difference between the tears of human beings and the tears of angels, according to mythology or according to Greek or Roman, culture tradition, in that way, actually there is no difference between prose and poetry, according to William Wordsworth. William Wordsworth has also talked about the difference between poet and scientist. William Wordsworth believed that there is, the difference between poet and scientist in this way that, a poet can rejoice with all the human beings, but a scientist rejoices only in his loneliness, in his solitude. And in that way, there is the difference between poet and the scientist. And, Wordsworth also focuses that poetry is the breath and final spirit of all knowledge. And in the philosophy of Wordsworth, the poetry contains all the essential branches of learning, and therefore a poet can be a philosopher, a poet can be a historian in the treatment of the subject matter in the poetry. And in that way, a poet is actually a very popular person. A poet can provide philosophical statements to the common people, and the common people at the time of reading poetry can get philosophy, history, and many other things from reading a poetry. A poet has the, capability to make other human beings active through the presentation of their poetry. And the inspiration that, common people get from poetry is very much essential for them to live in the world of difficulty. And in that way, William Wordsworth had focused many things in this preface, and in that way, he has actually talked about this romantic type of poetry, talked about his composition of poetry, talked about his selection of language, talked about his idea of the definition of poet and the function of poetry and many other things. And Wordsworth also focuses on the poetic process. He believes that the primary and the secondary imagination, these two types of imagination are necessary for producing a piece of poetry. And in the philosophy of William Wordsworth, there are four levels of poetic process. The first one, whenever a person will go to a certain place, and in that place a certain object can inspire a poet, and after getting the inspiration from that particular object, he will come back to other place, and he will be involved in ordinary life or normal normal course of life, and then he will think about that particular happening that he had enjoyed in his particular visit. And this is the second process, whenever he will think about that event, in his loneliness, in his isolation, and whenever it will happen, this is the second process. And the third process is that whenever after all types of daily activities, he will feel the necessity of thinking of that of that visit for the third time. And whenever in the third time he will think about that particular event, it means that that particular event has the potentiality to inspire the poet much. And in the fourth level, the poet will go through the secondary type of imagination. And after this fourth process, a piece of poetry, a particular piece of poetry will be produced. This is the famous poetic process of William Wordsworth that had been given in this preface actually. So in this way, William Wordsworth has focused a lot of things to give his stand about the composition of poetry. This is one kind of revolutionary element in William Wordsworth. William Wordsworth revolted against the neoclassical traditions of poetry in this preface, and that is why this preface to the Lyrical Ballads is believed to be the Romantic Manifesto, the landmark in the history of Romantic movement. And so, so the Romantic period started with the publication of the Lyrical Ballads, and the other poets of the Romantic period followed this tradition. And I think if you follow my lecture attentively, it will be possible for you to get the gist of the preface to the Lyrical Ballads that is essential for the understanding of the Romantic poetry. Thanks to all of you very much for your patient hearing.